Oh, no. Yeah, we're right. All right, as I was just saying, we are going to have 2 more meetings, 1 more to finish the story, and then 1 to go into, I don't know how to describe it, into related affairs and tie everything all together, and maybe tie together both semesters. I'd like to do 1 more year on this topic, but I just don't think I will. I'm really excited about talking about moral and ethical issues, and I want to next year do a series on myths on the origins of evil. We know where good comes from, but where does evil come from? And get into all kinds of issues and values, Native American myths and Bible myths and all on that. I'm very weary. I didn't get a nap and I didn't sleep well last night. It wouldn't have been so bad if I could have remembered the dreams, but I didn't remember the dreams. That's probably because the last time I had dreams, they were so revealingly insulting that I didn't want to remember it anymore. All right, we left off with when Athenaeus interrupted the burning of her son Dictys when he was being purified by fire, and when she interrupted it, Isis had to stop the whole process. That's where we left off. When Isis does stop the whole process, she not only metamorphizes from being a little bird that was twittering above the body of Isis, but she doesn't go back to being a human either. She goes back to her true nature, and she reveals her true nature as the goddess. When she does this, she claims the pillar for herself, and she takes it down with the greatest of care, and she separates the casket from the pillar. Then she takes the pillar, the wood from the pillar that she has cut away from the casket. She wraps that in the finest linen and pours herbs on it, herbs and unguents and such like that. And there's sweet herbs, and she gives it to the people, and they maintain it and keep it as a holy relic. And Plutarch said he saw it himself, the very wood that came from the tree. We are at a place now. We've been following several different kinds of streams or contributions, and what we were doing is, and are going to continue to do in this part, is to look at the myth in 2 parallel streams, one higher and one lower, but both having to do with the mysteries and with the whole process of initiation. In the lore of the 2 streams, the story is a warning. It is a warning about what happens if you remanifest the original sin, which was disobedience, sexual disobedience. And if one at the very crucial moment separates into doing something from a selfish motivation, the spirit is enough to destroy the personality. And this is why at critical times in the initiatory process, one must be perfectly obedient, because if you're not perfectly obedient, one little slip can destroy everything. So the whole gist here is one must become faithful and one must be obedient to the fullest. And it's all right to have the essence of what is rebellious, but that kind of rebellion has to be expressed in a creativity that goes along within the activity that requires the obedience. when Isis reveals herself, as the divine teacher, when one is aware of the true self or the true spirit, it's about over at that point. It's over because no matter, if you are attached to the material world, because Queen Athenaeus represents, in the part of the candidate for initiation, represents the world of illusion. Queen Maya, Queen Athenaeus, the same thing. It's always in that story. And if one clings to illusion and loving the material world, one is blind. Even in the presence of the Spirit, one is blind to what could be taught by the Spirit. And if one is so egoistic as to be rebellious, the Spirit revealing itself totally could cause it to rupture the connection between body and soul. And so that it is a really dangerous time. In the higher of the two streams, what happens is one sees the angel or sees the manifestation of self that is a representation of the divine. And before that spirit, the body is humbled, and it can't really go along. What happens is that, we'll get to that. One can't really follow along. And so one then, in reverence and obedience and dedication to the pure spirit, the body more or less is left like dead, or it is left as something to serve. And it is consecrated, and that's where it's rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and unto God what is God's. That becomes very, very clear. That's a statement of consciousness that each one of us comes to, that we don't have to deny the world anything. We can give the world what is the world's, because we are sure of ourselves in the Spirit, and we know what the spiritual wants. It's as when Christ says, "My kingdom is not of this world," meaning to say the material political world. The physical can't follow into that. It's a direct statement saying that it is not the time yet that the physical can be spiritualized, or that it can be transformed into conscious soul and totally spiritualized. That's yet to come. Now, a funny thing about this consecrated wood, this dedicated wood that is covered with the herbs, the same word that is used for the wood is the word that is used for the cross in the New Testament. And in that, it then comes to represent our burden or our attachment, our dedication to the material world in the microcosm, and we then see our physical existence in a very archetypal miniature of the world tree. Each of our bodies is a physical body. What we're talking about here is a consecration or an embalming or an anointing that takes place. And the physical vehicle, when it is offered as a sacrifice, becomes a very holy vessel. It becomes something really, really beautiful, rather than just something that we enjoy ourselves with, or that we try to give its own enjoyment. There are a lot of other things that could be said. I'm going to be skipping a lot of the things tonight, because I'm getting at that place that I realize there's so much in the myth that we'll never get it all, beside all of those postscripts that we're never going to get at. Maybe sometime we can talk about anointment and embalming and what that represents as activities in the soul body. But at any rate, when Isis throws herself on the coffin, when she has separated it from the tree, and she moans so long and so loud that the younger child, Dicty's younger brother, loses consciousness. She takes the coffin, and she takes the older prince, who she was purifying, and she sails away. But happens about dawn, and there's too much in her sorrow. There's just too much light from the stream of Phaedrus. This gets really far out. Too much light from that, and what she does is she dries up the stream of light from the river of the sun. Again, we're dealing with a lot of quoting, and we'll probably miss most of it. We'll just look at the few things that we can do. This is a continuation of the two-stream look at the myth. In the lower stream of the candidate that has failed and can't go through with the initiation because of allurement with the world, there usually is an enormous grief with that. The candidate grieves enormously, knowing after the divine lover is gone and that it will never return in this incarnation, when it knows that the soul goes into an enormous, enormous depression that approaches or sometimes actually is melancholia or insanity. But that grieving isn't the only grieving. There is the grieving that comes from the teacher. Because in a way, we, as people being willing, even in our feeble ways, even in our little capacity, are striving to become true helpers, to be servants of the gods. In that activity, the divine teachers or the adepts or the people who have already attained, they love us more than children are loved. Children are loved just because they're so beautiful and innocent, but we are loved because our true spiritual intent can be seen and everybody is pulling for us. And if we fail and it can't be consummated, the initiation, then what happens is an enormous grief, not only for our sake, but for the fact that there will be no help. And we certainly know that the world needs help, and if somebody drops out to do their own thing in the worst possible way, that means another chance to do something in that most wondrous, magical way has been lost. And so there is a grieving, and there's the lost camaraderie and all of those things. Clearly, in looking at it this way, the removed stream of light has two meanings. One is, even if you're very mildly etherically clairvoyant, and suppose you stand on a hilltop and you see someone on a sunny day doing something spiritual or contemplative, it really is like that Hoffman painting where you see the Jesus praying and you see the sunbeam come down. It actually is like that. That someone who is trying to live in the Spirit really does have their own sunbeam. However, when they forego that and they won't be obedient to that and choose the material life instead, that Phaedron river is withdrawn. The Spirit takes that and goes. The other is the river of light, is that connection of superimposition of the etheric soul material in the spinal fire, that one in the process of learning to direct consciousness makes the connection between the pituitary gland and the pineal gland and the pituitary body. There's like a stream of light there, and if one leaves the spiritual path, that Phaedron river is also separated. If we look at this same little episode in the higher sense, the moaning of Isis in the union with Osiris, or the reunion with Osiris, really is the Logos. There is a hum that carries on all the time. When we lose consciousness, that it is to say that we lose what we normally take as consciousness. When we are completely transcendent, because in the early stages of initiation, it is a divine love fest. One realizes that one is God and oneself is a focus of God. When that occurs, there is so much of a union between the human spirit or self and the life spirit, or that which is beyond self, the highest love. In that union, one really does become unconscious to the physical. At best, what happens, one's consciousness is, I don't know how to say it, miles up in the earth. And it's a funny thing that you can see what the physical is doing, but you have like a split or a whole consciousness that is in the other reference. Now, the fact that this occurs at dawn, and that it has to do with a whim. That was some of the details out of the story. There's a little bit of a whim. It has to do, this is very much a description of the last stages of the pyramid initiation. The Great Pyramid in Egypt was used as a temple of initiation, both as an Atlantean temple of initiation and as a post-Atlantean temple of initiation. The way it worked as an Atlantean temple of initiation was it was a vehicle for incarnation, that the Atlantean candidates knew all about the spiritual worlds, and they knew what we would call laws of nature. They could see them, but they saw them with the spiritual eye. But they didn't know anything about the physical body or the physical world. And so when it says that the plan was for Solomon's temple was the Ark of the Covenant, by the way, fits perfectly in that sarcophagus in the chamber. It fits in there perfectly, and built as it was built, with gold over wood, with the angels' wings coming near to each other. There would be a permanent light there that would be of condensed pyramid energy, which is something like static electricity. And truly, at that high of a charge of pyramid energy, anybody who would touch the Ark of the Covenant would die. And when Solomon was given the plans for the great temple, they were given from heaven, meaning to say that they were both astrological, in that sense of the word heaven, but that they were also spiritual. And so the Atlantean initiation was building the great pyramid around the laws of nature and being initiated into the nature of the material world. Now what happens is that people study, or like in the times of Plutarch, people, when they were to be dissociated from the body, rather than use a lot of herbs and things like that to take them out of the body, that's fairly easily accomplished inside of the Great Pyramid. One becomes very sensitized and very supercharged. And the last thing, when the initiate awoke on the third day out of a trance, the inner world consciousness, they were awake in the inner world, but the physical body was left in the trance. This is why the younger son lost consciousness before seeing the spiritual teacher, Isis. That they awoke on the morning of the third day at dawn with a breeze and the light of the sun on their face, meaning that they used to be able to direct sunlight and air down into that chamber, and they were bound in linen, very much like swaddling clothes, and they were covered with ointments of herbs for specific reasons. And so, like, the story is literally describing quite factual information about how some of the ancient mysteries were accomplished. So we get back to the story. When Isis found a place of solitude, she opened up the chest and she threw herself on the body of Osiris, and she kissed it, and she wept a long time. Dictys, the older, the son that was being purified by fire, who did not lose consciousness and who was taken with Isis, comes up from behind in silence. He sort of sneaks up, and he understands how she feels. When Isis understands that she understands, she feels it inside of herself, and she turns and looks at him with such a passionate look that he can't keep it together, and he dies. Though in some variants of the story, they say that when she was taking the boat with him and Isis in the casket, he looked over the side of the boat. Remember when we were looking at the introductions, he looked over the side of the boat, and seeing his image, he became fascinated with it and fell out of the boat and drowned it. And in another case, some people say that he was that even though he drowned or that he was killed by the look of Isis, he was given great honor among them and was given the title of Maneros, which we talked about quite a bit last time, to the uses of man. And the Egyptians always sing hymns to him, to Dictys, when they have their symposia. This again has hours worth of interpretation and other drolleries. This is again mostly in coded language. Again, most of it I don't understand. A few little bits I understand, a few of the direct allusions, and a few of the principles that are involved. As I understand it, the coming up from behind relates to the bottom-up approach that we have in our waking consciousness or in our ascending to the spirit. You might say the way things come into matter is it's straightforward. The spirit always looks at the center of all being, and it sort of backs into matter. And we, as we arise to the spirit, it's almost like swimming up through layered water. We hit the lower or the negative side first. In the same way, like little babies develop the negative pole of the chemical ether first, and you learn how to eliminate snot and everything else before they learn how to really strongly assimilate. They can only eat a few foods. They don't have that assimilative ability, but they do have very pronounced. And as we go through all the layers of all the worlds, we're coming from the bottom side or from the back side up, and this is what it means to come up on the spirit from behind. Now, in looking at this in the lower stream as we have looked at it, and Dictys understood, means that the candidate understands what has been lost, but not completely, and not with complete chagrin, and still tries to capture spirit or capture heaven by force. And the blow of realizing how powerful that force is often sufficient to rupture the connection to the physical. And there have been a number of people that have tried to force initiation, or who have not been obedient and lurched at the wrong moments and literally killed their body. Anyone who loves, it's a relatively simple matter to take them out of the body, because they're not, it's not a me-oriented thing. They have been transformed by love. And according to the initiates, like, for example, if you've ever read Zanoni by Bulwer Lytton, the ones who die in the initiation are the lucky ones, because to live afterwards knowing what you have lost and how you have, in a way, failed the trust given in you by divine beings is a really horrendous thing. And usually most people give themselves over to the dweller, which is their manifestation of their own evil. And if they often live terrible lives of addiction, right, Gwen? Lives of addiction, or things like, very deluded, harmful, painful lives. I have a friend that I believe killed himself in that fashion. I don't think he tried in this life for initiation, though he did force a lot of things open and tried to use spiritual energies for power. But even though he was very talented in every way you could think of, he became an addict. And it was not, there was never enough to satisfy his soul. And the only thing that could have satisfied his soul would have been service. And he just ignored service because he was too proud to do that. And he's a perfect example of the kind of life, even one life removed, for that to happen. Also looking at it in the lower stream, the alternative story then becomes the alternative story to the Narcissus myth. When he looks in the water and sees himself, when he looks in the spirit and abrogates the divine nature to the personal, say, hey, I'm not great, I'm God, he has committed suicide. Literally, he has shut himself off from God. It's as if saying, I don't have to have the divine spirit. I'm divine already. I can just pull off and be myself alone. That's the lower side of Narcissus myth. In the transcendental part of this myth, everything in the whole myth of Isis and Osiris exists now. It's continuous and it is perpetual right now. And the weeping of Logos, the wailing and the crying, are the hum of love of the life spirit of the Logos as it is doing its creative activity. And its tears literally represent the individualities, the selfhoods that are precipitated, which allows the pure to remain pure and to become even more pure. So the union of the life spirit with the divine spirit results in this perpetual creation that keeps humming, and its crying are all of the beings, the tears are the gods that come to existence. The coming up from behind and understanding, the word understanding that is used there is the word for gnosos, or gnosis. That is knowledge. Knowing of self from behind self or beyond self. If our consciousness gets put into the divine love, and then we can look at even our spiritual selfhood as just nothing but a ripple within that love, that is a real high kind of gnosos. And of course, there is a death. This is the other side of the Narcissus myth. When Narcissus looks into the water, or in this case, if it's Dictys looking into the water, he sees self. The water, as we've spoken of it before, is the clear light of intelligibility in the noetic and noeric, or in the life spirit consciousness. It is like when you understand the truth of something, you not only understand the principle, but the light of truth, like, aha, you have that all alone. And looking into that, it is perfectly pellucid, it is perfectly crystalline, it is perfectly lucid. And in that light, one sees self as a whirlpool or a rill, or just as a focus of that light. And if that's the case, then one really does die to self. If you've had that experience, you are then like Goethe's younger Werther, like the brother that decides to become the spiritual student commits suicide. It isn't a killing of the physical body, it's a committing of suicide to personal living. But it is instead a vicarious living, not living through someone else, but living for someone else. In our case, as Christian mystics, it would be living for the Christ's sake. We would live for that light. I am the light of the world in a very, very literal way. Maneros or Manaros is again one of those conjunctive word plays that we talked about last time. And it is important that the word symposia is used, because the word symposia means drinking party. And Plato's famous symposium, this is a direct reference to that. Because if you look at, Maneros, if you put the Greek words together, it's one of those things that can mean either love of wisdom or wisdom of love. So that when you have the love, you have the wisdom to know how to use it. And by having the love of wisdom is how you practically get to that love-wisdom state. And so Maneros is a funny play on words in that regard. And the Symposium by Plato, where it talks about the separation not into two halves, but into a higher and lower separation, and all those stories that all the people told in the Symposium by Plato, they're all false, but they are all partial truths. But if you look at the whole topic of the Symposium, it is the wisdom born of love. When Socrates says that for all of these great men and all of these people that he's seen all of his life, it is this little old wise woman who told him what love was all about. It means more than any of his studies put together. So this is, in the Mid-Eastern sense, a drinking bout. This is the consciousness that comes from ecstatic experience. Ecstatic experience when we, as the whirlpools, are the cup. We're the grail cup, and then we're filled with the ecstatic love wisdom of the life spirit, and it is a kind of drunkenness. Of course, now Plutarch isn't willing to let that be enough. He says, still others think that the boy was not called Dictys, only Dictys or Maneros, but that he was called Palestinos or Peluses, and that he was the founder of the city of Pelus, which was truly founded by the goddess, and that Maneros was just a title that was given to him along the way, and that he was much honored by his office with Isis, even though it can be interpreted as a failure. He was much honored and given the title of Maneros and the founder of the city of Pelus, and he was the first to discover the art of the Muses. And so everybody drinks to him when they say Maneros, when they drink their wine, lift their wine cups. I don't know how much this has to do with the Pelus was one of the ancient names for Memphis, and I wonder if Memphis with Elvis and all of those people are just some kind of profane rebirth of that same idea of a symposium with drinking in wine cups and the whole thing. Those bizarre things start going through your mind. You say, no, I must be insane now. But it's a fun diversion. I don't know the wordplay, so I'm quite a bit at a loss. I don't know all of the initiate code that is in this part of the story. the way it appears to be is that because Pelusi's, or the city named after him, was on the eastmost mouth of the Nile, that means it was the first one to be presented to the sun, and that we're dealing with an eponymous individual, that is a founder who gives his name to the city. And since we're dealing with the first to discover the art of the Muses, we have three things saying the same thing. All of them say that he is a founder, or that he is a first. And three times the first is saying that this is thrice-born Hermes, the archetypal Egyptian initiate, who is the consummation both of Atlantean wisdom and of modern, at least in Plutarch's time, Egyptian wisdom. And so it has to do then with the realization of selfhood. And the realization of selfhood by realizing that in the true nuclear family, the Divine Father and the Divine Mother as the spiritual stuff, the stuff of spirit from which everything comes to be, are the true parents of the self, even if that self is God. And so this is another way of saying then that the act of initiation, in that there is a threefold realization of self, and there is a uniting of all three powers, that is willing, feeling, and thinking, or will, imagination, and conception. All of those three are tied together. This is what happens in the union of self and beyond self. It is a union, again, not only the pineal and the pituitary as it is in the physical, but in their higher parts, the human spirit and the life spirit. Or as Madame Blavatsky says, all initiation begins with Uranus and Neptune, and she's alluding to the life spirit and the divine spirit. Plutarch isn't willing to let it rest there either. He always has to keep throwing in all of these little side tricks. And he says that some people say that Maneros isn't any name at all, but that it's an idiom that means, may such be present in becoming measure. And that people just say Maneros, may such be such be present in becoming manner when they're drinking. And its purpose is both to exhort people to live life to the fullest, but with the recognition when they do so that it should be within measure. And he says in that regard, it's just like the little box that they have with a little idol of Osiris in. They show it to people not so that they should grieve over the passion that Osiris is dead, but they show it to them as meaning to say, this is going to be you pretty soon. So live life to the fullest in the same way that Osiris did, but not without measure and not without restraint. As usual, the little asides or those colloquial things that Plutarch throws in are often as important and sometimes more important than the story itself. Because you have to admit it's an odd story. Maybe what I ought to do is for when we recapitulate the whole thing, read the whole story. Because it only takes about 5 minutes to read the story and it's done. I won't make any comments on that. If we look at what Plutarch is saying about Maneros, he's literally telling us that the story has three different meanings, three different levels of meaning, and that each of those levels of meaning is itself often subdivided. One is the sacrifice of self as a dead child to the spirit. That's the highest spiritual living. The second is as the self as an expostulator of divine wisdom and a servant carrying out the muse's wishes, carrying out the works of the gods. And the third being worldly wise knowledge like the little coffin of Osiris, which is basically hearsay, saying, drink up, boys. It's, the wine cup isn't going to be there always. Now, it's interesting that for the masses, which represent the earth rather than the separated crystals or the separated gold, but they represent the earth, all we ever get is hearsay. And if we look at this, when we're in the physical body, all of our information, even that which seems to be most direct, is really hearsay. It's third hand. We have impressions that go through an inversion in the lens of the eye, and then they are transformed into neural impulses, and then those neural impulses are interpreted within the limitation of the brain. So that when the spirit gets the information after it has gone through the eye, the optic nerve in the brain, it's hearsay by then. It's not a direct perception. And when we hear things, the same thing is true, but instead of having a lens, it gets inverted, or it gets changed by the tympanic membrane, and then it gets picked up by the fibers of Coti, and then it goes through the auditory nerve and is again interpreted by the brain. And so it's almost like saying, like to see the external world as well as we can, or to experience the external world, what we're getting is a pretty indirect experience, especially when you compare it to spiritual sight, or even a lot of forms of clairvoyance. In a lot of forms of clairvoyance, you're putting yourself in the other being's shoes, and you're experiencing it as they experience it. Or if you have full spiritual sight, you are experiencing it as you, and as not you at the same time, or the perception, which we're back again at the Sugnambra Sutra. But but I'm not going to rub it in again. All right. So there are three meanings then, in some ways, for the three attributes of spirit, and it actually even relates to the three approaches to spirit that we have in terms of religion. If we look at the lower one, like the admonition to live life fully, but watch out, you're going to be dead, that's the whole religion of the Holy Spirit. Birth, the taking of the procreative force into our hands gave us the knowledge of how to come into the physical world. But it also put us so much into the physical world that we have then the fear of death. And not only just a discontinuity from life as we know it, but a whole deathly consciousness where we have to kill everything in order to analyze it or to know it. It's that kind of a thing. So the religion of the Holy Spirit is then a religion of laying down the law, and that's one way of looking at it. On the other hand, it can be seen as a life of sacrifice. And it's then seen as a life of soul somewhere, or a religion where self is sacrificed to a unity for all. And in the soul feelings of love, one has the source of usury and does it for serving. And the highest level is on the religion of the Father, and in the religion of the Father, no one can bear that, because it is like thinking of pure creation, or experiencing pure creation and nothing else. Not even the imagination to hold that, but just pure creation that even manifests the imagination that it can be held or conceived in. That's so far beyond us. Everything is all one there. So it's not surprising that it's a deathly experience. When Isis has been reunited with Osiris, she wishes then to see her son, Horus, the son that she had left in the city of Butos. She left him there to be reared while she was searching for the body of Osiris. So she put the chest away, and when she did so, she went then to Butos to find Horus, and Typhon happened to be out hunting. And he happened to be out hunting at night under the full moon, and he came upon the body where she had left it. And he recognized it, and he was so enraged that his plan had been foiled that he tore it into 14 pieces. He scattered all the 14 pieces abroad. And that's it for almost the rest of the night. We'll have a little bit more of the story that we'll tell, but that's it for tough ideas, because this is the most celebrated part of the Isis myth. It is the part that is told and retold, and it's the part that is found in more other initiatory myths than any other part of this story. It's something that has been rife for speculation century after century, and each new mystery student comes out with a new we've been talking a lot about it several times in the course of the year. We've been talking about about the part that repetition plays both in the entire creation and in the mysteries and in our preparatory spiritual life. All of the different experiences that we experience in the creation are something like minimalist music. Not that I'm touting minimalist music, but you repeat things over again and again and again with very, very slight differentiations each time. And that the process of repetition and recapitulation. Recapitulation is really a beautiful word. You know what the word recapitulation means? It means resurrender. That you resurrender to the truth each time that you go over a rendition of something. But it is an incremental way to learn many, many different things, but always keep them within a unity of a cycle, or by maintaining some kind of continuity between all of the different things. Now, the unity of conscious spirit is inwardly and outwardly divided. In the act of coming to waking consciousness, that unified spirit realizes that there was not consciousness, that there is not consciousness, and there is therefore a division between known and unknown. And that gets reflected in the one spirit so that it is divided internally into the divine masculine and the divine feminine, who unite for all creation. But at the same time that there is a consciousness of both divisions, that consciousness ties together these polarities to form a triune conscious focus between duality. So there is a division into the internal masculine, the internal feminine, and being aware of the difference between the internal masculine and internal feminine. And when there is the possibility of division, then there is the possibility of repetition. When there is a constant awareness of repetition, then there is a cyclicity. And in that cyclicity, there is a resurrender. For the divine, it is a surrender of spirit to the process of creation and to the creatures and everything in the creation. However, for us, there is a sacrifice of our creature nature to the sake of the spirit. And so something like that is what we're trying to get at in the whole process here. It is the principle that is associated with division. We've talked about it for a number of years now as the principle of distribution, as the Platonists called it. We're going to look at it in a much different way now. But first we have to get to back to the story for a little bit. When Isis inwardly learns of this, she embarks on a paper skiff. And the word for the skiff is, in Greek, is baris, which is where our word bark comes from in the Indo-European languages. And she sails through the marshes looking for the pieces. And because her work was so holy, as she goes through the marshes on her paper-hulled boat, it has become a tradition that any time that you make a paper boat and float it on the river, that you are living in a repetition of Isis, and your work is so holy that the crocodiles won't eat you. Might be a good scientific experiment to try it. And it's not that they won't eat you because they fear, but because they revere the goddess. In the experience of the crocodile is both fear and reverence. Because every time she finds a piece, there are 14 pieces, she makes a tomb for it and builds a temple around it. This is why they say that there are so many temples or tombs to Osiris, because she did it piecemeal. Others say, no, this is not true. They say what she did was, at each place where she found the piece, she made an image of Osiris, and she buried the image of Osiris just in case Typhon would overcome Horus in the coming battle, that just in case that did happen, he would be driven wild, going here and there and here and there, hearing that all of these different places are the burial place of Osiris, and that he would give up his quest to again tear the body apart, and he'd give up in futility, and he wouldn't want to follow all the way out. A little bit more story, and then a little bit more frou-frou, and that's it. The one part that Isis did not find, which was the part that causes awe, makes you think, was Plutarch some kind of phallic sexist? He was in the Mysteries of Dionysus, after all. But maybe he was saying something there also. The reason Isis never found that part, because it was thrown into the river, and when it was thrown into the river, only 3 kinds of fishes would go after it: the scaly coat, the devourer, and the sharp snout, and they all ate it. And ever since then, those three types of fish have been taboo to eat. You're not supposed to eat them at all. Not having the real thing, Isis made a counterfeit of it, which some people say was made completely out of gold. This is an interesting thought, because in order for her to have made a counterfeit of it, or a replacement or surrogate from it, she had to have a pretty good memory of it. And she consecrated this to the Egyptians and gave it to them to honor at their festivals, as the Greeks honored it, the phallus of Dionysus at their Dionysia. And they did that right down to the time of Plutarch, because Plutarch said he saw it. Okay, now we're ready for something that is and isn't a hard topic, but I'm sleepy, so I don't know how good it'll come out. The dismemberment, I don't remember the exact Platonistic term. They have a very beautiful term for the dismemberment of, in their case, Orpheus, is called distribution. Now, the distribution, or the tearing apart of the parts of Osiris, is another way, it's another recapitulation of something very early in the story. And that is to say, when Osiris put himself into the casket and he fit exactly, that was a description of distribution. How he could put himself totally into the forms and just fit and not overdo and not underdo. That is one of the qualities, the just right quality, like in the Three Bears story. The just right quality is the process of being harmonious with yourself so that you can give everything your all, but not in a lurch destructive effort, nor in a lazy self-destructive effort. The tearing of the body apart is another factor of distribution, not the factor that it fits perfectly, but that distribution allows specialization in all senses of the word. If there is a distribution, if there is spirit, and that spirit has attributes, that's altogether different than if there is a God. Spirit exists before God, but in the process of distribution, where specialized cells are formed, there is automatically a distribution. But it's really a neat thing, because each one of these cells is special. And each one of them is another representation of spirit, or of the potential of spirit. This process of specialization carries very, very deeply into matter, right down to atoms and perhaps particles of atoms and the kind of energy that atoms live in. This is specialized or distributed states of the one. Now, before we go into the process of distribution, we have a few little things to pick up here. And one of those is, again, wordplay. And this is going to try and tie a bunch of things together. Plutarch knew very well that the name of the city was Buto, but he persists in calling it Butos. And what I believe the speculation of Mead is that he did this because he was trying to tie it together with the Greek word Boutis, which means plowman. And the plowman Boutis is the constellation up in the heavens that has the bright star Arcturus. And he backs this up with a statement by Wallace Budge that the Arcturus and Boutis were called the house of the eye. and that this all fit, which is what the which is another name for Horus. Osiris is the house of the eye. Mead goes further on to say that this then indicates the voyage of Isis has to do with a great movement or change in the world soul and or in the individual soul. I agree with all of his speculations, but I don't think he understood the full meaning of them. We've already talked in this series and in an earlier series several years ago about Isis and Osiris. We've looked at two different astronomical interpretations. Tonight we're going to look at two different ones. The one that we looked at 5 years ago was that Isis is the moon, and that in all of the full moons in winter are seen, the constellations that they form, that they fall in full moon by full moon, each of those is an episode of the story of Isis as she searches for Osiris after his death in fall. A few weeks ago, we saw that there is another astrological meaning, and we saw that Isis was Virgo, and that the whole passage of the sun going from Virgo through the winter constellations is shown within the episodes of the story. So there are two different sidereal. I wish I had slides or something that could show you the pictures of each of them one by one. One being a full moon thing, which would show the winter sky at night, and the other being solar phenomena, which could only be seen in summertime to see where the sun was at this time. And each has a different meaning, but I don't want to get that much into recapitulation. Both of these are related to the ecliptic, or the ecliptic and the celestial equator. Exoteric astrology is associated with the equator ecliptic bands, whereas esoteric astrology is associated with polar astronomy and polar astrology. It's a totally different thing. The Earth temporarily becomes the body of Christ, and it is impaled on the spirit matter pole, which was thrown to Earth, which is the phallus. We saw that years ago, that the phallus of Shiv was thrown into the Earth and penetrated right through the Earth, and that's the pole. And our material egoism is the pole, or is the cross on which Christ is crucified. And that pointing of the pole to where it came from has to do with esoteric astrology. There are two streams of activity. I've talked about this in a number of places a number of times. I don't remember, because each time I try to develop them from a different way in a different place. One is the stream of activity that goes from the North Pole down to the equator. That is new thoughts, new ideas, new spiritual impulses begin in the north, and they work their way down to the equator. That area right around the pole is ruled by Saturn. The area here at the equator is ruled by the moon and Jehovah, the Holy Spirit. And the evolution that happens here is that forms evolve, and forms migrate from the equator toward the poles. So we have two different streams which meet in the what are the middle altitudes called? Temperate zones. So things go Mercury, Venus, And right in the middle of things is the sun. We have then we have Mars, Jupiter at the pole, Saturn associated with the Father or Saturn's day. And in the middle we have the sun or sun's day. And the moon, we have the moon or the moon's day, the Saturn period, the sun period, and the moon period coming to our current experience on the earth. They're all foreshadowed in and on the earth. So there are references then, the formal things, the matter things are associated with the equator or with the ecliptic. The spiritual things are associated with the pole or with the pole of the ecliptic. All right, it's tough. The interplay of the Earth wobbling on its axis so that the pole stars change around this pole is what makes for the historical and evolutionary changes in all beings. That is this, for example, the North Pole was called by the Chinese an emperor, or a naming founder. However, the pole of the ecliptic was called the Grand Emperor. No, all right. And so that when there was a changing of dynasties, it meant that there was a changing of pole stars around the pole of the ecliptic. We'll talk a little bit more about this later. So the poles represent a moving toward an invisible spiritual life, and the hemispheres represent a shift toward the material life. There is a constant change of pole stars. The current pole star is right here in the Little Dipper. It's in Ursa Minor, the Little Bear, and it is sometimes called Arcus, and it is associated with one of the bright stars on the circle of pole stars, Arcturus. This all has to do with a legend that is universal, the legend of Arcadia, which is very similar to the legend of Shambhala. Those are the consciousness that is represented by the higher latitudes as the spiritual worlds are superimposed on the physical. We talked about this before. We said that if you had etheric vision, that the pole of the Earth, the magnetic field of the Earth, or Uranus, which is beyond Saturn, would be the magnetic field of the Earth, and this would be the great tree, the great world tree, that the Bodh tree that Buddha sits with his back against, or the tree that Christ is crucified on, and the life that is brought to the world year by year by year. So this is then Shambhala, or it is Arcadia, whether it is depending on what you're looking for, whether it is the pole of the Earth or whether it is the pole of the ecliptic, which is an even higher level yet. It is where if you there is a way that you can superimpose the heavens onto the surface of the Earth. And the place where the pole of the ecliptic is just north of the Gobi Desert, which is where everybody went for how would you say it in modern terms, a genetic manipulation, a DNA, RNA fix-up between Atlantis and our current times, which would be likely to. So, I don't want to get into too many sidetracks because some hard, serious things I want to get to. So then the high latitude, or the permanent high latitude, then the star there is Arcturus. Ursa Minor is the little bear. Sometimes it's called the little dog, and sometimes it is called the little beer, which is the beer of Jesus. The large dipper is called the great beer, and it's sometimes called the beer of Lazarus. I couldn't chase all the references down, but what we're trying to look at is that in initiation, which is a little death, the Spirit leaves the trivia, all of the distribution into an endless stream of experiences that are chaotically confusing, and it tries to reunite its consciousness with that which is inerratic, something that is motionless, something that is timeless, and something that is permanent. This is represented by taking the consciousness away from the equatorial bulge, you might say, and driving it upward to where the stars never move. You can look at the pole star. There is something to stargazing. And that if you look at the one star that isn't going to move, that you won't have to change position all night, that's the pole star. And in looking at that, you have a sense of permanence, and you rise out of it. And it's considered a very malefic star, because all spiritual things are, that relative to the earth, the things of the spirit are deathly. They're powerful. It's a highly violent thing. So then, when Isis puts away the chest, the words that are used in Greek are literally, she put it from her feet, or put the vessel or the cell away from her feet, which is, this is again, two-part astronomical, astrological. It relates to that passage of the travail of the beginning of initiation of the Virgin in the book of Revelation. You know, she stands there with the sun and moon under her feet. And this also alludes to the launching of the moon. That is the birth of a new moon. We're going to come back to that in just a little bit. We're going to examine those kinds of things. But first we've got to clean up the papyrus skiff. I have no notion about that at all, and I've pondered that for years. I think it has to do with something to do with the airy element over the water element, and saying that the realm of intellect goes beyond the realm of feeling and emotionality, and that is how one gets freed of the little monsters that can be in the watery desire world, like the alligators and such like that. You're sort of skiffing above them all. That sounds a little bit too much like symbolism, so if you just want to doubt that, that's very good by me. I did really like the relationship between awe and fear, and how the two of them change. And again, that fits in with the difference being knowledge or feeling fear, or being in awe because you know the truth of something again. I'm not going to say anything about crocodile lore because we'd have to introduce a lot of Egyptian culture, because that's pretty complicated. And believe it or not, I'm not even going to talk a lot at all about fish lore. We did that the first time and a little earlier, so we're going to skip all of that. So the rest of the night are a few thoughts on distribution, which is one of the central things of the entire play. We just were looking at repetition and recapitulation as a means of changing or of compromising between the ever-changing and the changeless. By having a fast enough repetition or recapitulation, you simulate constancy, but you also simulate the maximum amount of change. It's also a compromise between the trivial ephemeral and the profound eternal consciousness. So it is a compromise. Repetition and recapitulation are a compromise in the most basic way between difference and uniformity. Something that's always the same and uniform, and something that is different. Spiral, recapitulation, and repetition are the means that all creation and all evolution is accomplished through. The intents of the creation are accomplished by doing things over again and again, even if you're progressing just from one painting to another painting to another painting and developing each time as you go. New experience by repetition and recapitulation becomes known. All of the mysteries are taken out of it and it comes into the known. And the collective differentiation, separation, and specialization are known by the Platonists as distribution. We've looked at it in the past as the distribution of selves. Now I want to look at distribution per se in a baldly abstract manner. That is differentiation and the maintenance of unity. But to do that, we're going to go back to astronomy and astrology, because that is where most of our fundamental repetition occurs. We have unconscious repetitions like heartbeats and lung breaths and such like that, but we're not conscious or aware of them, nor is it always a wise idea to become too conscious and aware of them without having great trouble. The most common form of repetition and recapitulation that we have is founded in the axial rotation of the earth. That is the day. Night follows day, follows night, follows day. It is the atom of our conscious life. Each day we recapitulate what we did before, but in a different way. We surrender to the unknown of tomorrow in time and to the unknown of tomorrow being different in space. This is very, very fundamental to all spiritual accomplishment, recognizing the surrender to repeated surrender to the new or to the unknown in time and space. This is the principle that all the 12-step programs are based on. Surrendering to reality, and surrendering to reality one day at a time. Sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof. The second most common experience that we have, conscious experience we have of repetition, is also in the heavens. It has to do with the lunation cycle, the 28-day cycle of going from new moon to full moon to new moon to full moon. We've said it before, and everyone in history has said it. Isis represents the moon, or the moon represents Isis. But we don't see the moon until it is full. When the moon is new, it's in the womb of dark space together with Osiris. And it's only seen or known when it comes to its full. That is like saying that the invisible intent of Osiris comes to be known and seen through the reflection of the moon when it is full. This is why it was so important to see the full moons through winter, because the seeds of experience that were practiced or planted by the initiates during the summer new moons become manifest 6 months later or half of the zodiac later. On the 7th month, they come ripe as the fully known experiences of the full moons of winter. So the full moon then is a form of external completion. It's sort of like a statement of the meaning of the invisible, dark, hidden side of life. The new moon is filled with questions. We're in the dark, and the full moon, we're in a kind of reflected light, and we can see it all played out, and we have the answers to what we've been doing. So we can see only at the light of the moon could Typhon go hunting. And clearly, if the externalization of matter is the realm of Typhon, when the hidden esoteric material is externalized by the moon, this is another way of saying that the full moon is the outward manifestation, whereas the new moon is the dark or hidden manifestation inside of us. So, this is a cycle. And we're going to see, especially next time when we finish the story off, we're going to see that this cycle of Isis, Osiris, and Horus, and Typhon happens again and again and again. Every time that the sun is going from, the moon is going from new to full, Isis is collecting light. She's putting things together to externalize them. But during the time when she is losing light, she is not collecting, but she is distributing. Things are being taken apart and scattered. They're being assimilated into the spirit. They're being absorbed and assimilated and spiritualized. So there's a two-level meaning to the whole cycle, and it is a repetition in that way. Now, the lunar cycle is not sufficient in its own. It is the cycles of repetition that are most common that are above it and below it. We've looked at the atomic cycle of the diurnal axial rotation of the Earth. The cycle, the other repeated cycle that is macrocosmically atomic. The primordial atom is the Earth not on its axial rotation, but in its orbital revolution. That is the year. We note the months within the year. We note the days within the month. The moon depends on the sun, and therefore the lunar cycle is dependent for its relevance on both the day and on the year. Even the meaning of life is determined by the year of life. Though while the development stage, the lunar development stage is going on, we still say a child or an infant is so many months old. We still have that in our consciousness. So the year is a very fundamental repetition and recapitulation. It is in large what the day is in small. Now we're in the last page here. Now, 13 lunations occur in 1 year. But 1 year is the whole, and it's invisible. So there is a connection then between the 14 days of distribution and the 14 days of collection with the atomic cycle of the moon, and there is a relationship with 13 moons and the whole with the larger or more macrocosmic conception of time. And so I'm trying to get the idea of 14 as a whole. Now, each of these new moons or each of these recapitulations has a different character, has a different flavor. And the Egyptians, just as we do, associated those flavors with the 12 signs of the zodiac. And this was done because the number 12 is associated with the maximum number of perspectives in space or in time. We've just looked at it in terms of time as 13 cycles and the whole being the 14th cycle. Now let's look at 14. We're trying to look at the distribution into the 14 parts. If you take any point and surround it with other points of equal value, whether they be a point circle or equal circles, the most that you can get in three-dimensional space, where each of the three attributes are represented on an axis, where there is the consciousness of depth coming out of the three, where the three come into the four, and the most that you can put are 12 around the 13th. There are no more, and each of these 12 points around the 13th center is unique. It's not arbitrary. It's not ad hoc. This is fundamental and necessary to the geometric nature of things. It's fundamental to three-dimensional space and our world, all of that. These 12 viewpoints are unique. This is what our juries are based on, having 12 different outlooks. The 12 around the 13th form a whole in themselves, meaning to say that in the same way that the 13th, the new moon represented a whole that had the 14, the 12 around the 13th, all taken as one, represent a whole. And we have the same principle again of a center or a microcosm like the day or the central locus, and we have the middle sphere, the relative 12 points of view or the relative 13 new moons, and we have the macrocosm or the whole. So this is the 14 members of Osiris then represent the distribution of consciousness in time and in space in the only way possible and in the most efficient way possible in our earthly experience. So it is always dealing with a whole and a central little atom and the state in between. Now, how do we understand this? I'm trying to get at a really important point here. We could spend all kinds of time on the manifestations of this and other things, but I don't want to do that. In order to experience the whole, it involves the simultaneous experience of focusing on the center in concentration. When we focus on the center, our consciousness gets awakened. I don't know how to say it any other way. It gets vivified. And in that process, it expands to the whole. Without concentration at one point, any one point, there is no meditation in the larger sense. And all of our experience of reality is a recapitulation, a simultaneous recapitulation of concentration in our little worldly lives and transcendence in a meditation of our higher spiritual life. So this is a whole process then of focusing and surrendering, focusing and surrendering. And so the phases of the moon or the cycle of a year as a whole point to our whole consciousness. What we do every day when we enter our meditations, we have that focus, but at the same time we expand out to the broad universal consciousness. And by recapitulating, that is resurrendering to this process, every year we open up and we experience the reality. Now, it's not clear whether the penis of Osiris is out at the peripherum or whether it is at the center. It doesn't make any difference. If you are out at the axis, if you are distributed as far as you can go, then you are always looking inward in concentration. If you are in the center and you have only the center, you're always looking out in distribution. And there is a necessary division, and there is a necessary interaction in consciousness between the two states of waking consciousness. The different temples can represent the different organs of the body or the organs of consciousness in the signs of the zodiac, but basically what they represent are flavors, differentiations, specializations. They represent how you distribute it into that. It's the palette that the creation goes to. Now, it appears to me that it is a principle of nature that the process must begin with concentration. Unless one can center, there cannot be any distribution of a field. It seems to be that the more we look at the unchanging center from the external peripherum, to that extent can we come to the wider consciousness of the whole and fulfill our separate special lives when we concentrate. Truly in the spiritual life there are only two things we should focus on: what we're doing and God. And each of them, we have our local activity, which is what we're doing. And we have our divine responsibility to connect to the one so that each of the little minutiae of our lives is brought to that center. And with that consciousness, the one is the central. It's like the pole star. It's like the eternal. On the other hand, if we were to live only in a meditative consciousness and only look outward, that's what the second version of Isis putting all the little Osirises in the other temple. Because this is exactly what happens. The more scientists try to break down matter, now they're beyond quarks now, the more, and that's exactly like what happens with if Typhon should win, meaning to say, if the worldly life succeeds in distracting us and ripping us apart, it will always be successful, and it will even frustrate itself in its own success by having too much differentiation without enough consciousness. And so the Isis myth, I think, very, very clearly shows that things begin with the atoms one day at a time or one point at a time, and with the centering, and then